Here we go. I think we're live. Welcome everybody to the UdK Tuesday number 229 with our guests Moritz Henning, Setiadi Sopandi and Avianti Armand, invited by Professor Markus Bader, who will now introduce today's guests. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Well, first of all, a very warm welcome again from my side to Avianti Armand and Setiadi Sopandi, as well as Moritz Henning for today's architectural adventure, I would like to call it. We're specifically grateful for Avianti and Setiadi to join us here in Berlin, in this virtual Berlin, where this University of the Arts is based. Because you're basically joining us from a completely different time zone around the planet. And it's in the middle of the night, and we very, very much appreciate your extra effort to make this conversation possible on a regular evening hour here in Berlin. I'm super excited and looking forward to this evening's presentation and conversation, because it will give us a look into an architecture that is happening in another geography, in another political and societal framework. And to me, it has always been super interesting that architecture as a basic quality of space, housing, and kind of surrounding us is a first of all human phenomenon. And that this human phenomenon allows us to connect and to a certain extent look for translations into other cultures and other minds between different humans around the planet. So this basically pandemic situation today gave us this very, very special opportunity to have you, Avianti and Setiadi, in this conversation. How did this come to being? Very simply, I guess in one of the last live moments before lockdowns, as it feels, I ran into Moritz Henning. Moritz, and this is probably worth mentioning because many of these coincidences do not happen in digital times. Because in digital times we need, as we all know, we need appointments and Zoom calls that have been pre-organized. It wasn't like that with Moritz. We just ran into each other in an exhibition opening. We talked about this and that. And we also touched on, I think, the pandemic situation and Moritz's, let's say, habit or protocol of a sort of wintry escape to Asian regions to explore architectural phenomena and meet people. And I think you mentioned that probably this year it will be not happening or will be very difficult. You were not entirely sure, but it was this moment when we somehow gave birth to this idea that this conversation would be an interesting opportunity. And to know a little bit more about Moritz, and also one of the perspectives that I would add to this evening is Moritz. I think every person that CVs I have here in front of me, the CV starts with is an architect. So we have the pleasure to be experiencing a conversation with three architects that also add, after the architect, other forms of practice. And to me, this is always very interesting where this training can lead us and how this architectural practice takes form and is interpreted by each of us in order to be able to critically discuss and bring forward what architecture can do for all of us, I guess, together. So Moritz Henning, and I'm going to read this, is an architect, independent researcher and writer based in Berlin in Germany. He studied architecture at the Technical University in Berlin and is registered architect in the Berlin Chamber of Architects. Over the last 20 years, he has worked as a freelance project manager for a number of Berlin architecture firms on a wide range of projects, such as schools, hotels, and office buildings. Moritz also develops symposia, workshop, and discussions, books and magazines, and writes for Architectural Journal. He's particularly interested in the legacy of post-independence architecture in Cambodia, a topic he has dealt with since 2007. In January 2020, the architectural guide Phnom Penh he wrote together with Walter Koditek was published. Since 2019, he is one of the artistic directors of the project Encounters with Southeast Asian Modernism that explores the impact of modernism at the crossroads between early globalization, local conditions, political upheaval, and the search for an independent identity in post-colonial Southeast Asia. Moritz Henning is an active member of the board of Stadtkultur International e.V., which is dedicated to exchange between major cities of the world. He's also a member of Docomomo International and the Förderverein Baukultur. Moritz, thank you very much for being here with us today. May I pass the word to you and also the honor to introduce our further guests. I think you're muted, which is something I will do.
Okay. Thank you very much. And for this well, this occasion, I'd like to mention that we didn't stumble into each other just by chance in summer. In fact, we were born in the same town in southern Germany, but first met, I think, 25 years ago in Berlin, 25 years. So it was not an accident. So we already knew each other. But yes, it was that I told him, there I correct you, it's not only a holiday escape, winterly holiday escape for me, but more and more I try to do some projects in Southeast Asia, as well, sometimes I feel more at home there than here, and not only for the climate. So, and one important project you mentioned that was Encounters with Southeast Asian Modernism, and that was a project that we discussed, and that led to this idea to invite Avianti and Setiadi today. So for me, it is not only my personal interest to visit Southeast Asia, but I also think it's important to connect to bring together different spheres, different approaches to architecture. And Jakarta in Indonesia is still the country's capital. That will change in some years. But Jakarta is official partner city to Berlin. But despite this fact, there's not so much activity shown by the two cities to maintain this network. And I personally think that for several reasons, and Marcus, I cannot add anything to your description. I think for several reasons it makes sense to have a look at the architecture there, as well as the way architecture is discussed in public. And I think Avianti and Setiadi can tell us a lot about this. Well, for me, I first came in touch with the two, with the work of the two, let's say the work of the two, at the 2013 Venice Architecture Biennale, when they were part of the curatorial team for the first ever Indonesian contribution to Venice. So I was deeply impressed by the way they traced the development of Indonesian architecture through its construction materials and showed how it was transformed over times. So although it was for me aesthetically a bit over the top. I learned a lot about Indonesian architecture and its history, and that was the first time for me. So unfortunately, we didn't meet personally there, and it took another 2 years before we met. That was in Frankfurt, where Avianti and Setiadi presented their exhibition Tropicality Revisited in 2015. This exhibition gave a great insight into contemporary Indonesian architecture, beyond the cliches that usually go hand in hand with our Western idea of tropical architecture. Yes, there we met, we talked, we spent together, but it took another 4 years before I finally got the opportunity of actually working with Avianti and Setiadi in the framework of the before mentioned project, Encounters with Southeast Asian Modernism, that shed a light on post-colonial architecture in 4 Southeast Asian cities. We were able to win Avianti and Setiadi to curate a contribution on Jakarta, occupying modernism, as this contribution was called, was a highlight. Well, I can really say this was a highlight of the overall 2-month program that was part of the celebrations of the 100th anniversary of Germany's famous design and architectural school Bauhaus in 2019. The exhibition that took place in Jakarta in October 2019 surprised me, and I'm pretty sure that many other visitors were surprised too, and why we will hopefully see later. Surprised us with this unorthodox approach to a historical observation of some of Jakarta's modernist buildings. And well, I think I have to do a commercial. Now, what I'm really excited about is that our collaboration is not yet over, because Occupying Modernism will be part of the exhibition Contested Modernities that will be shown later this year at the Haus der Statistik in Berlin. Contested Modernities will combine contributions from Jakarta, Phnom Penh, Singapore, and Yangon with a view on post-colonial activities of Germany in Southeast Asia. So that's a brief introduction on how we 3 came together. And well, I hope our collaboration will not be the last. At least there's one in the pipeline. So, because working with them is for me, and all the others in the German team of the Encounters project, is always surprising. They are always bubbling over with new ideas and always clearly focused on the topic. But what I can say, they never do what you expect them to do. So, which is a compliment. But now I think I should introduce the 2 speakers. And I will do it like Marcus. So I'll start with Avianti. As Avianti is an architect, yes, as Marcus said, but she is also a curator, writer, poet, and activist, and she's based in Jakarta. She curated numerous exhibitions and led the curatorial team for the Indonesian Pavilion at the International Architecture Biennial in Venice in 2013, what I mentioned before. She was one of the curators of Tropicality Revisited at the Deutsches Architekturmuseum in Frankfurt in 2015. In 2017, she launched architecturindonesia.org, a virtual museum and archive repository of Indonesian architecture, together with Setiadi Sopandi, Nadia Renandi, and Ria Febrianti. Avianti Armand is the recipient of several awards, including the Indonesian Association of Architects Award for her Kampung House in 2008, and the Katulistiwa Literary Award 2018 for her latest book, Museum Masa Kecil, which means Museum of Childhood. She also contributed to several books on architecture. From 2015 to 2016, on behalf of the government of Jakarta, Avianti coordinated a group of architects to design child-friendly integrated public spaces, resulting in 123 units throughout the city. And finally, in 2017, she initiated Non-Ton Yuk, a movie screening activity focusing on films criticizing religious radicalism in order to fight intolerance and radicalization in Indonesia. And I think that's only a small selection from the confusing, for me, confusing variety of her work. But it might give you an impression of the many fields of work Avianti is involved in. And well, it's a bit the same with Setiadi. Setiadi graduated from the Universitas Katolik Parahyangan in Bandung, gaining his bachelor in architecture in 1998. In 2002, he got his master degree from the National University of Singapore. As an architect, Setiadi is co-principal of a small practice, Indra Tata Adilawas, based in Bogor, Indonesia. Setiadi has been actively involved in research, publishing, curating, and archiving since 2007, with special attention on modernism, modern architectural heritage, and contemporary art and architectural discourse in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. Affiliated with the Modern Asian Architecture Network, MAAN, and since 2015 with the Marziana project that aims to discuss and document the heritage of the modern movement in Southeast Asia. He is the curator of the Friedrich Silaban archive in Bogor. Friedrich Silaban is one of the most famous architects of Indonesia, I think, and but we will hear about him later. Setiadi is also co-founder, member of the board of curators, and the director of architecturindonesia.org. Just recently, in December 2020, Avianti and Setiadi opened another exhibition in Jakarta titled Apai Tuami, 30 Years of Indonesian Young Architects. Interesting, 30 years of young architects, okay. I've not seen it, but you will tell us later about this too. So in the lecture, Avianti and Setiadi will now resume, as they told us, a decade of promoting architectural discourse in Indonesia through their exhibitions. And even also that I know a little bit about their work. I don't know everything and all. So I'm looking forward to learn more about their curatorial practice and Indonesian architecture now. Avianti, Setiadi, thank you for being here tonight. Well, it's late evening for us, but really tonight for you. And yes, the monitors are yours.
Thank you, Moritz, for the kind words, and also thank you, Professor Bader, for inviting and introducing us. And good evening, everyone. We are very delighted to be here with all of you, and we are so honored to be invited in this event. I personally hope to deliver this event, to deliver this talk in person for sure. So because I miss Berlin so much, but this online talk doesn't fall short of a delight in itself. So thank you for everyone. And in this occasion, Avianti and I would like to share our collaborations in various projects since 2013. But there are few things to inform. First, no, we are not a couple. Second, we are architects, but we run our own practices, as mentioned before by Moritz. I run my own firm, while Avianti does a partnership with another architecture firm. Once or twice we did a shared project together, but we did not do that in a regular basis. So this presentation is not about that. This is about what we have been working, born out our mutual interests, talking about architecture. This is also about what else we can do apart from selling design services. In our country, architecture is still pretty much regarded as a technical engineering occupation regulated under the Public Works Department through a governmental engineering council linked to professional through the Architects Association. So it's a bit a mess up at the moment, but it's going to be get a bit better. But at the same time, architecture is also awkwardly, half-heartedly considered as one of the creative economic sectors, while the Department of Education and Culture occasionally regards vernacular architecture as one of the focus of its program, overlapping with what the Department of Tourism targets as one of the strategic assets. In overall, architecture as a multi-dimensional discipline is only sparsely recognized and remains pretty much fragmented. Ministry about traditional villages as long as the architecture can bring tourists. While the Ministry of Education and Culture cares as much as they can be a nice representative display of Indonesian cultural national identity, while the Ministry of Public Works regulates how we conduct our practices, and the Ministry of Finance, of course, impose taxes on our fees. One side, it means that we are lacking of support and infrastructure to operate what architecture can mean beyond the conventional practice. We have no space in museums, let alone to have a museum dedicated for architecture by the government. So we have no role in cultural affairs except even as a lip service in government official speeches. On the other side, this also means that we are lacking a wide picture on how to develop our own architecture culture, even among the professionals. So today, presentation about the highlights of our work together, trying to bridge some gaps to make our professional life a bit more interesting and fun for ourselves. Our collaboration was started when Avianti initiated and curated 2 exhibitions back in 2009 and 10, and calling younger generation of architects for participation. Being a senior, Avianti was then had been participating in architectural scenes in the early 2000s and gained her momentum as a curator when she saw the need of another architecture exhibition in Indonesia. Since 1990s, there has been a tradition by young generations of architects to stage exhibition marking their presence in the national scene. However, saw them as quite a big problem since the exhibition were mostly result of from a pack of enthusiastic architects, friends, and peers got together while collecting their works in models and drawings, and eventually publish them in books. The problem is there's no selection process, let alone how they decided on what to show. There were discussion about design, of course, but we saw them as repetitive and isolated by their own respective commissions. The architects talk about the usual problem in practice, clients' expectation and money versus their imagination and also their OCD tendencies. We found them more and more as a mental support group rather than a professional circle. In the 2009 and 10 exhibition, Avianti took the liberty starting the call with the issues directed toward the young people, namely the ones in the 20s and the 30s. So that's when I got interested and participated. For the 2 exhibitions, she raised a contextual and existential question for the young architects to ponder upon the current problems and issues, and to reflect their ideas and practices before submitting their works. So they have to think, in short, and to rigorously dig for architectural expression and solutions relatively unique to Indonesia. So they have really think hard before suggesting something to the exhibition. These 2 events got us starting to talk about architecture and also we talk about the architecture culture of our in our country. It was mostly about the presence of meaningful, effective, and critical discourse in the middle of self-promoting, business-oriented exhibitions and publications. Apart from finding a potential working partner, we also created small circles like minded friends, architects to do different things, lacking long-term means to sustain structured program or projects. We can only hope for patch of work of stepping stones, relying on momentum through events and occasions. And here we are. Separately, we also have a handful of activities and our design commissions. You can see in the list. But our first formal collaboration was when she asked me to make her an illustration for her collection of architectural criticism. And in return, I asked her to edit my first book, a textbook for Indonesian architecture student. And that just about had to happen when we heard a news about Indonesia being invited to Venice Biennale for the first time. This project came to us at the national competition call for curator and designer for the first ever Indonesian participation for the Venice Architecture Biennale. It was an exciting competition since it drew many attention among us, but not only among architects, but also academics. The 14th Venice Architecture Biennale, directed by Koolhaas, calls for a theme absorbing modernity and asks the question about participating nations the last 100 years of architectural history. The competition stirred up communication among peers, so it made us talking. Uh, Friends, colleagues, professional architects called professors. Professors team up with students to ready their team with arsenal of design and architectural history. Being invited to the event for the first time, Indonesian architects took it rather seriously, or maybe rather nervously. The theme and the pressure of being present for the first time incited a surge of interest in architecture history. And suddenly they talk about architectural history. We merged all debates, national architecture and national identity. It caused a whole process sometimes become overly patriotic and confusing architectural history with architectural heroism. Content-wise, our competitors and some of the jury members tended to pick the pavilion no more than as a hallmark of for Indonesian architects, and also probably a trophy for cabinets of architectural pieces from all over the country. This mostly means architectural vernacular forms, regional variation of decorative arts and building types. As the result, the presentation, the pavilion, was expected mostly as a bric-a-brac assemblages of representative architectural pieces from the region. This was came with a confident note, usually by the government official, obviously, that the audience knows nothing about Indonesia, which is obviously wrong. This imagination, this imagination prison somehow potentially limits our option on bringing critical assessment on what we might consider as an Indonesian contribution to the international scene, and that is exactly what we avoided. All of those preconceived ideas seems to be a nervous loss of opportunity. What we had in mind was to use the momentum as a snowball for Indonesian architectural history and discourse. The issue was that Indonesian modern architectural historiography was rather underdeveloped, as it was highly charged with nationalist prides, mostly because it is still being valued as a decolonization construct and paradoxically confused with nostalgic sentiments. And it was not only something we thought as interesting to show to the audience, of course. We thought of making a frame that works as a reflection for ourselves while keeping the chance of introducing interesting artifacts for the audience. It should work something like a matrix, a diagram that simplify confusing threads of abstract thoughts and tangled issues, and introducing more and more broader evidence of architectural objects from the past. So we devised a frame that enabled cross sections cutting through the 100 years of history with several protagonists. We decided not to fill these roles with architects. Instead, we fill it with materials. An agent, we call it an agent with the specific properties and potentials to be nurtured, optimized by design, and their role and values in various ecological contexts throughout Indonesian archipelago. This way, we can productively view architectural history from slightly different angle and watching the ups and downs of these materials through building tradition and technologies. We came across a small article by our fellow friend, professor, entitled "Where Have All the Craftsmen Go?" Sounds like a 80 pop song, telling about a debate by a famous two Indonesian-based Dutch architects about the diminishing quality of craftsmanship from the practice, and amidst of the introduction of new modern building techniques in the early 20th century. We came up with a proposition not putting architects and but rather look into the existing infrastructure mode of production on how Indonesians built their buildings through the ages. And Avianti came up with an idea to put six major building materials, as you can see on the screen. The first one is timber, second stone, bricks, metals, concrete, and the last one is bamboo. With this scheme, we were able to productively set independent stories across historical periods and to see how these materials as protagonists perform in design and building. This strategy highlights the importance of context and how architectural strategies were derived from the availability of materials and techniques throughout 20th century. Of these materials were organic and natural sourced and had been utilized for over a millennia for various purposes until they were incorporated into modern building techniques. But some concrete and metals obviously were introduced in the beginning of the 20th century and quickly gaining the foothold in industry and vernacular construction as well. And we deliberately put aside glass from the six and instead made it as a medium of the presentation as the projection was for the videos. It was a coincidence as well as a metaphorical that glass being one of the most developed modern materials, but its use in skyscraper envelopes in tropical Indonesia is indeed a problem. Overall, there were 7 screens that, with the first screen being the introductory clip explaining the curatorial idea, and the rest is 6 history presented in 6 video documentations projected on the white transparent glass placed diagonally in the middle of 500 square meter dark empty section at the one end of Arsenale. We tell stories of timber, brick and stone, concrete, steel, and bamboo in short 8-minute clips each on how they were perceived and utilized by designers and societies through times. Audience can grab a stool at will and while taking a rest and watch the entire show for about give and take 40 minutes, or get out after one because annoying sound we play over and over. It's quite annoying. But for the ones who stay, they will see stories, of course. Here we share some of them to give some clues of how we narrated the story. Timber, this one is about timber, was widely recognized as something vernacular, pre-modern, and probably more associated as something traditional and imbued with values, cultural values. Some construction techniques were associated not only with their structural properties, but having roles in social hierarchy and cultural identities. How these elements are stacked, joined together, and joined not only about their structurally performed, but more about, sometimes it's about more about determining types of buildings, signify certain values of their owners and social conducts. And the first decades of the 20th century, some Dutch architects, sometimes with cooperation and good connection to the local royal courts, intervened with the effort of developing local custom and building typologies. Managed to create few new forms stem from the local culture to accommodate, interestingly, new spatial qualities such as bringing natural lights into the deep part of the space, to introduce Western auditorium idea under Javanese roof arrangement, like you see at the bottom picture here. This introduction of modernity seeps through the feudalism under colonial patronage. The creative use of timber and modern technology enabled to support wild imagination of architectural bric-a-brac, combination of different roof forms from all over the region. The project for the building of the first technical school in Indonesia, depicted at the top here, utilized laminated timber plywood as arches to support a majestic Orientalist roof. However, as the century progressed, due to over exploitation of natural hardwood, quality timber became a rarity. Timber harvesting is illegal because quality teak wood and iron wood price skyrocketed, and causing the price became so expensive and no longer available in great quantity. So we have to replace them with other affordable materials for the structure. And on the use, low quality timber for non-structural and easily replaceable elements like the bottom ones. While modern materials such as steel and concrete were rising in popularity, the value of bamboo in construction have been a roller coaster ride. It's quite interesting because bamboo used to be a staple in many villages, traditional villages that have been sophisticatedly utilized in many forms of household utensils, building elements, obviously, weapons, musical instruments, as well as food. Bamboo was sourced locally with sustainable harvesting cycle as a natural water reservoir and microclimatic controller, among many other cultural things. Like the example here, a village in Central Bali extensively used bamboo for their houses and developed a thick layer of very beautiful bamboo shingle cuts as roofing materials. However, this tradition is now being challenged due to the introduction of tangerine plantation owned by the villagers themselves, because there was suddenly a demand for Balinese tangerine in the market. This situation virtually eroded the bamboo reserve of the village, which forced them to abandon the tradition and opt for the ugly zinc roofing, as you can see at the bottom, at the back. It's quite sad. But the problem was not simply about availability. We guess that bamboo has been regarded as a low-class material and temporary, as opposed to more superior hardwood timbers and modern materials such as steel and concrete. In many occasions, bamboo was only used as temporary scaffolding or for temporary structural objects in festivals. When a pestilence epidemic hit several Japanese towns in the 20s, lasted until the 30s, bamboo was accused as the culprit for enabling rats to dwell inside the tubes. And the bottom one was actually a picture from the campaign by the colonial government. However, presently bamboo holds a bright future, and in this part of the world because it can be sourced ecologically, sustainably, and work relatively easy with hand tools. Indonesia and Southeast Asia holds a vastly diverse endemic bamboo species, which have been central to the life of the inhabitants. And thanks to some bold moves recently by designers, fellows, and developers as well, bamboo provides some room for improvement as a futuristic design materials and promises integration with new technologies such as printing and digital modeling. Bamboo's return as a primary and celebrated building material so far seems to be limited for touristic tropical resorts, but many believe that this is just a beginning. And this is another project that we did. We had a good opportunity to showcase Indonesian contemporary architecture in Frankfurt. When Indonesia took this stage as the guest of honor in the Frankfurt Book Fair in 2015, we are expected to bring a fresh outlook of the country's recent takes in the scene. But as we did that, we also brought up a long prevailing but underlying issues of tropicality, what we call as tropicality. As an issue, it has been considered as essential since the beginning of European settlements and introducing new building tradition in the tropical region in order to provide health and comfort for European settlers. But along with that, traditional settlements and buildings were also even seen in new light as a source of design inspiration for modern buildings. The idea merges with colonial settlement, exploitations, regulations to battle the paradise yet challenging environments, while intertwined with the introduction of new architectural ideas and scientific innovation in the 20th century. As a discourse, the tropicality stays for more than a century and recently regained a momentum as a way to make buildings use less energy, comfortable, and still interesting. And of course, better for the environment, being advantage as a tropical country. So we selected 12 buildings from 12 architects representing various ideas on how they see the tropical climate. Some of them conceive the idea of tropical weather being a classic problem, that we should strategize the architecture to deal with the hot and humid weather in order to provide comfortable spaces with ideal temperature, humidity, and breeze. But some consider the hot, humid tropical nature as a friendly and versatile environment, and explore the span of possibility of outdoor living. And to accompany the projects, inside the Unger's House in House in the Deutsche Architecture Museum, we present a timeline of 7 themes. It's quite a big, thick explanation about this, surrounding the issue of tropicality, to explore how it evolved from mainly a curiosity for the explorers, the European explorers, into a colonial endeavor, as well as into post-colonial national search of culture and artistic identity. Tropical climate and geography had been meticulously described, analyzed in cross sections, cataloged, systematized, understood in scientific manner. Uh, Probably inspired by von Humboldt exhibition in the Americas, Wilhelm Junghun explored the mountainous region of Java and charted its mountain as well as vegetation, and motivated by colonial interest for cultivating colonial crops. Junghun research defined a climatic region based on topographic elevations. The knowledge gave way to the further exploitation of the fertile land to grow coffee, tobacco, rubber, tea, and later cinchona as the cure for malaria. And this was the way tropical knowledge, knowledge about things that had been familiar, came to us. The tropical climate with its year-long hot and humid weather was a specific burden for the Europeans. It's a different case with holidaymaker, which usually stay for a short period of time. But the European settlers in the 19th century had to deal with the constant steamy heat almost 24 hours a day, with little promise of refreshing breeze. Indoor air could be suffocating, while staying indoors was a hazardous business since malaria-inducing mosquitoes claimed death on daily basis. There were many Europeans dealt with this issue, but mostly by developing a distinct lifestyle while copying what locals do and maintaining a semi-outdoor life as much as possible. As you can see on the screen, these activities evolved around distinct building types, which were a combination of vernacular building types and Palladian country houses. In British-controlled territories, it's called bungalows, and we call it a landhuis in Dutch Dominion areas. And in the early 20th century, things got more serious when it comes to public sanitation, because of there's a lot of private colonial investment coming into the country and inject the colony with massive urbanization. Until the end of the first decade of the 20th century, the Dutch colonial government didn't put any interest upgrading the welfare in the colonial society. Initiative for life and scientific improvement, interestingly, usually came from learned elites. Just like this one is a chemist called Hendrik Tillema was the first to breach urban sanitation issue with the need for a proper institutionalized urban planning with good architectural designs. He promoted a thoughtful urban water supply in Indonesian cities, and also disposal system combined with proper housing design to stop the spread of infectious tropical diseases. And the concern over public sanitation comes along with the cultural discourse brought by Dutch architects practicing in the colony, especially during the 1920s and 1930s. And debate over how to regard architectural tradition along with the modern European architectural styles was one of the major issues discussed publicly back then. Apart from it, it was also apparent that they were put substantial effort to design buildings to perform well in the climate. Back then, it seems that they have quite a selection that can freely choose from new and hype international style, vernacular forms to suit the local context, as well as to experiment with new daring structural systems. And the 20th century also gave us better understanding about the climate we live in. In the mid 20th century, in development in climatology and building science, we know how to manipulate several building parameters, orientation, protective devices, openings for better response to the climate. So research stations all over the globe produce techniques, devices, and charts helping architects to deal with the climate. With the help from the United Nations back then in the 50s, developing words became an essential part of the exchange of techniques for practical innovations. So textbooks, journals were readily available for homegrown engineers to overcome housing and sanitation crisis in developing countries, as well as providing modern buildings like tall hotels, modern office building, a proper apparatus for the context. And this scientific approach, architecture became so scientific back then, and it comes handy with the rapidly developing cities like Jakarta. Apart from the popularity of glass curtain air conditioned buildings, there were notable architects designing tall buildings in the 70s and 80s, carrying the passive cooling approach by controlling the indoor spaces exposure to the tropical sun and rain elegantly. These modern architectural language, even though they are foreign in expressions, they were well received as a form of modernity embraced by Indonesia. However, tropical architectural discourse came in a completely different fashion when it comes to specific places. With the rising tourism industry in the Southeast Asia during the 1970s, brought a new strain of tropical architecture. New tropical resorts born out of places like Bali and Phuket in Thailand sprouted like mushroom and brought the spores to other emerging holiday destinations. Bali has been an inspiration since the early 20th century, as with exotic culture set on pristine beach, majestic rice fields, and volcano. And European artists came in as these colonies and work, like, for example, Walter Spies, a Russian-born German painter, composer, musicologist, and also curator. He had been lived in Bali since 1927, and even helped to co-create one of the most iconic traditional dances, like Kecak dance, which is now regarded as traditional, interestingly. Much later on, this also happened to architectural scene. Via Wawaruntu, an art dealer turns a hotelier, made connection of art dealers, artists, celebrities, including Mick Jagger even, antiquarians. He lived in Sanur Beach as a bohemian. He invited guests to come to his house and enjoy the hospitality. As time progressed, he made his house into a hotel, which such a selection of guests, many were deeply inspired. And interestingly, among them were Adrian Seika. He was a founder of Armand Resort chains hotel. Geoffrey Bawa, the famous Sri Lankan architect, Donna Friend, an Australian artist, and Ed Tato, a Paris-based American architect, and Peter Muller, an Australian architect. This bunch started a new resort genre, that the so-called tropical resort boutique, or whatever you call it, with many help from Singapore-based coffee table book publications, and became the inspiration to all, even to Indonesian, including the Balinese themselves, learning the Balinese culture from these kind of books. Bawa designed a row of exclusive Balinese villas for Wawaruntu and Seika, as well as his world-recognized pieces in Sri Lanka. Ed Tato worked mostly for Seika, designed the first Armand Puri in Thailand, Phuket, in 1988. Peter Muller designed the first Armand in Indonesia, the Armand dari Ubud, in 1989. Tato also designed Armand Kila, the second Armand, a few years later. And also Armand Jiwo is just very close to the Borobudur Temple in 1997. And Carey Hill made his debut in Bali starting since 1992. And after that, he became regular for the Armand Resort. And the list grows into a repertoire of thatched roof villas adorned with luxurious organic material for tourism. It continues until today with the latest edition, the latest one being by David Gianotan from Oma last year, abandoning the roof, completely gone. And instead, he introduced modernist gigantism for the partying crowd that once seemingly laid-back island. With such a long and thick history of tropical architecture, we inherited many layers of and understandings on how to respond to tropical climate, and has been a source for further search by our fellow architects. So our selection of 12 Indonesian architects with their recent projects reflect their views and their responses. So I hand over the screen to Avianti to continue with the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Chung. I'll take it from here. I will share the screen. Wait. Okay, can you see it?
Not yet, but it's probably about to come up.
Wait.
Yes, perfect. Now we can see it.
Okay, I'll make it bigger.
Great.
Okay, I'll continue from Setiadi's presentation. We will show some case studies from the exhibition, showing approaches by Indonesian architects in dealing with varieties of architectural briefs set in different contexts and locality. They are presented as case studies for us to see how the architects perceive and internalize the tropicality into their practice. This is the house of Andra Matin, called AM House in Jakarta. Andra Matin developed the functional program of his house like sandwich linked by an architectural promenade. Surface and semi-public functions are placed in the ground floor, while the common family activities are accommodated on the first floor. Private spaces are on the second floor. The roof-covered glass top is accessible as a spacious sightseeing spot on the very top. All of these are linked into a sequence of cinematic journey in approaching every space within the house by ramps. People move smoothly through ramps, passing planes and volumes. Andra Matin House is situated on a trapezoid plot in a corner within a nice cluster of a residential neighborhood in South Jakarta. The square plot faces the north towards a very nice small community park surrounded by two-story houses. As an uncommon feature among the typical residential developments, the park is indeed a blessing. It provides a huge benefit for the surrounding neighborhood. Rather than have a front yard in the ground floor, Martin devised an expansive, partially sheltered deck on the first floor, covering almost half of the plot with recycled ironwood planks. The planks leave gaps in between, giving slit of light and breeze through going down to the ground floor. The first floor deck serves as a living and dining area equipped with kitchen as well as a swimming pool. You can see it on the upper left. An unobstructed view to the neighborhood park across the street. This living, dining, and kitchen area is shaded by the thin concrete blocks, contains a common space shared by the children, and supported by only 8 thin reinforced concrete columns. Being entirely open to all sides, when the wind does not blow, it would become an unpleasantly saturated and still. It is commonly solved by placing electric ceiling fan. However, since the concrete box is placed so low, The only place Martin can put them is above the ramps. The box has a corridor leading to the common space and shared bath or toilet, and children's bedrooms are not necessarily rooms. They are more like a closet, similar to Japanese capsule hotels. Almost entirely isolated for air conditioning, this space has a horizontal slit at the front facade for fresh air. The master bedroom is placed in the sharp end corner of the plot, occupying relatively narrow area divided from the main building with a green space. And located apart from the main house, the bedroom is connected only by an uncovered ramp. Getting there is simply going to another building into a cabin. The bedroom is a mezzanine containing no more than a king-size mattress and a small access to a spiraling staircase down the void leading to the bathroom below. And the bathroom is in fact also a closet and a dresser, half buried in the landscape with a tree growing in the tip of the sharp corner. Despite having an opening at the end tip, the entire area is air-conditioned. But to help reducing the extra humidity caused by the subterranean position of the space, Martin placed an additional mechanical dehumidifier under the sink. Martin compressed the bedding areas to the extreme and restricted the volume of the air conditioned to the minimum. By placing the common activities into the first floor deck of the main house, he stretched almost all the family members' activities to the outdoor space. The timber ramps and the timber paved platforms are fluidly interconnected without defining clear boundary between sheltered and unsheltered areas. The timber planks guide our bare feet with the warm and textured surface, seemingly keep suggesting us to relax and to be immersed in the informal and yet stylish atmosphere. The next case study is Ahmad Tardiana's house, which is called Reading House in Bandung. Tardiana was very attentive on how his house would cause a minimum impact on the natural as well as social environment. In order to have a generous open green area on the ground, Tardiana stacked the slim private spaces on the first and second floor. To prevent water runoff, he directs all the rainwater to the ground with gutters, to the infiltration wells, and to the open grounds. The ground floor opens to the street as well as to the backyard, with an amphitheater and a generous terrace for multi-purpose use, permitting the children to come, play, and go as they please, and allowing constant breeze flow through the space. Tardiana thoughtfully developed expression of his architecture by adapting a simple gable roof to cover the playful volumes underneath. Walls are made from unplastered terracotta bricks. Around 70% of all timber planks used in the house was recycled. In order to reduce cost as well as to test his idea, Tardiana employed almost nothing from glass for his openings. Instead, he applied the bamboo weaving panels to all rooms, except the 3 small pieces of glass for his working table. The bamboo weaving panels serve as privacy screens that allow breeze to constantly move in and out throughout the day, and leave no particular space in total airtight isolation. As the result, the indoors are constantly cool, cozy, but unfortunately dusty. Visually, the light penetrates the bamboo weaving panels, helps to create a distinct mood that has a similar quality to traditional houses. The mood is matched by the rich but controlled composition of material, texture, and joints. The next case study, the next project, is by Adi Purnomo, called Studio Cahaya or Study of Light. Studio Cahaya is a private residence and gallery owned by a couple of art aficionados. The site is located in West Jakarta and has enjoyed a booming of property value due to massive housing and commercial development in areas. The plot have been filled up. Is there a delay in my voice?
No, that was somebody's microphone. Sorry, it should be fine now.
Okay, okay. The posts have been filled up with buildings quickly, and Purnomo has already predicted that the area surrounding the plot would be densely built without setbacks at left, right, and back perimeter walls, and it happened. Known for his standout profile, the client would have expected that Purnomo would bring the commission into an artistic search, which would eventually be a delightful experience for the couple. Purnomo was preoccupied with the idea of artistic and physical presence of light. Intuitively, he approached the brief from how natural light can contribute primarily in the making of the architecture, an element which would be potential to the idea of an art gallery. He gathered technical information about the annual sun path on the given latitude and longitude, and intuitively linked it with the existing perimeter walls. He then translated the figures, the bearing and the angle hours, into sectional graphs. Based on the graphs, Purnomo developed an idea on how to have the sun sculpt the volume of the building. Assumed as a box measuring 15 meters times 15 meters and times approximately 12 meters, the volumes is subtracted by particular angles corresponding to sun altitudes. In order to produce a dramatic effect caused by the play of light and shadow into the interior, Purnomo found that sun bearing, the annual course of the sun along the latitude, would not produce a dramatic result as much as the hourly course of the sun along the altitude during a day. Purnomo then meticulously put quite an effort to study on how to sculpt the volume and came up with a scheme. He found that the interior would appear most dramatic as well as manageable if the volume was subtracted by two angles, by the 11 a.m. hour angle and by 1 p.m. hour angle in particular configuration. Other angles would make the interior become difficult to be used. So the two angles create a gap, a void which divides the volume into two, creating inclining and declining surfaces, bring the sunlight into the interior. The light hits the angle surfaces unexpectedly, producing interesting light and shadow play as the main statement of the project. And this is how the project got the name Studio Cahaya, derived from phrase study of light. This is the last case study, the last examples of case study that we will show from the exhibition. The Misbar by Kineforum and Sutoras and Liando architects. Kineforum Misbar is a temporary open-air cinema built as part of the 2013 Jakarta Biennale, an international art event of Jakarta. It was a collaborative project between architect Sutoras and Liando and Kineforum, a non-profit organization dedicated to screening international and local art house and independent movies. It was supported by Jakarta Arts Council and the Department of Tourism and Culture of the Jakarta City Government. Kineforum Misbar is driven by an agenda to promote Indonesian films to wider public by screening movies on the big screen for free in public space. The architects and Kineforum developed a clear concept called Misbar, referring to the popular acronym of Gerimis Bubar or Disperse at Drizzle, a nickname for the inexpensive popular open-air movie screenings, which have been recently disappearing due to competition from new urban attraction. It is also known by another name, layar tancap, referring to a sheet of white projection screen held by a pair of poles driven on the ground. The characteristic of the Misbar is that the screening could come to an abrupt end whenever the rain starts. However, in spite of this drawback, it often draws nostalgic memories in those who lived through those eras. The proposal by Kineforum and Sutoras and Liando elevates the notion of an open-air cinema into a hip, fun, and educative facility. One could consider drizzle and rain showers or any of the other drawbacks of an outdoor venue as problems, but one could also see them as an inevitable condition which lends such social activity a bit of adventure and fun. Sutoras and Leandro are determined to revive this experience and to elegantly reintroduce the outdoor tropical urban festivities to Indonesian cities as an alternative to their conditioned shopping mall. Located in the very symbolic center of Jakarta at the base of the National Museum, Kini Forum Misbar occupied 14-meter times 38-meter space. Limited by budget and its temporality, it was clad with a 6-meter tall translucent curtain on a steel pipe scaffolding system. It consisted of a main screen area with plywood tiered seating, a projection room, and a foyer area separated from the cinema seating area by a pavilion housing of the screen, sound system, the ticketing booth, and a snack bar. As the name suggests, it had no roof. Kini Forum Misbar screened movies for free, thus it had no doors. The design relied on simple gesture to guide visitors to the seating area and to provide the necessary minimum separation from outside distraction. Instead of having a completely open movie screening like the traditional layar tancap, the architects opted for a space with a well-defined spatial boundary. The space was simply enclosed by a translucent agricultural synthetic fabric, commonly referred as agronet. The design provided a volume which gave the cinema a significant presence in the vast open space surrounding the National Monument. Okay, next is the initiative that was told by Setiadi in a glimpse. This is the website arsitekturindonesia.org, and then continued as Indonesian Architecture Museum Foundation that initiated by us. Arsitekturindonesia.org is an online repository as well as a museum that focuses its collection on historical documents regarding architectural works, figures, and discourses in and about Indonesia, especially those produced during or near the independence era until now. Since 2016, this collection has been directed at describing the broad definition of Indonesian architecture and is also expected to map a wide range of architectural practices and discourse in Indonesia. And since the beginning of 2019, we have been under the Indonesian Architecture Museum Foundation to develop more active and extensive museum and research work. The founder and the board of curators for this foundation are clockwise: Avianti Armand Setiadi Sopandi, Febrianti Suryaningsih, and Nadia Rinandi or Nadia Parwestri. Nadia and Febrianti are the executive directors at Pusat Dokumentasi Arsitektur or Documentation Center of Architecture. Pusat Dokumentasi Arsitektur is an independent and self-sufficient institution to serve public in enhancing information through the documentation and research of the various issues of the Indonesian architecture in general and the urban heritage in particular. Like any other museum in general, our museum space is divided into two. The galleries, which contain brief editorials on various themes from certain from our archival collections, and the repository, which contains our digital archive collections. Unfortunately, all is still in Bahasa Indonesia. Our collections are obtained from archives of Indonesian architects, which are unfortunately only kept by their families or as working documents of their bureaus and consultants, or from collaboration with other foundations such as the Rumah Asuh Foundation, which documented traditional architecture in Indonesia, or from Prius Architecture Group. As you can see, if you sign in our website, you will be able to see various themes covering various topics about the history of modern architecture in Indonesia. as history as well as topics that are relevant today. Linked to this website, we also use other media channels, social media such as Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to reach a wider audience with more concise and up-to-date topics. This channel proved effective and gained more engagement, especially when we intertwine architecture with sensitive themes such as religion and feminism. At such time, the number of people visiting our website will be increasing significantly. The online assault or offline assault is a little annoying, but it's a consequence that makes our website a little more heard of. The repository of archives is divided into 4 categories: acara or events, project or projects, architects, and media. Events cover all archives or of architectural events, most of which are exhibitions. Projects include work and design documents for Indonesian architects, both passed away and still active. Architect focuses on the profile of architects and their body of work. Meanwhile, media refers to various forms of media in our collection, including photos, slides, blueprints, sketches, books, and others. This is an example of collection of events from our repository, which consists of exhibitions, workshops, and classes held both locally and internationally. And these are the photos, samples of photos of our Deutsches Architektur Museum Tropically Revisited events from the preparation until the opening of the exhibitions and the contents of the exhibitions. Next is the Friedrich Silaban exhibition in National Gallery Indonesia in November 2017. Friedrich Silaban is the most prominent architect during the early post-independence period in Indonesia. He designed some of the most distinguished monumental projects in the early 1960s and contributed in changing the looks of Jakarta. His masterpiece comprises of the Istiqlal Mosque, the National Mosque, the Bank Indonesia headquarters, the Central Bank, the Gedung Pola, an exhibition gallery showcasing Indonesian infrastructural development in the 1960s, built on the ground of the Indonesia's proclamation of the independence, and many more state institutional buildings. The exhibition follows the narrative from Silaban's biography written by Setiadi Sopandi and launched in 2017, focusing on Silaban's professional career development, beginning as a vocational school graduate during late colonial era, turning into an aspiring architect in a newly independent country. It was conducted by producers Nadia Rinandi and Febrianti Suryaningsih in collaboration with curators Setiadi Sopandi and Avianti Armand. The exhibition emphasizes the many intersections between various places, events, and discourses, culture and architecture in Indonesia, and the figure of F. Silaban, who may not have been much aware of. A total of 243 objects are displayed in this exhibition, consisting of original images of dozens of architectural works, original photographs, prize documents, and original objects from Silaban's archive in Bogor. Next is the samples of some of the exhibits. This is the Agricultural High School in Bogor, and Istiqlal Mosque, the National Mosque in Jakarta, the Bank Indonesia, the Central Bank in also in Jakarta, several institutional buildings, the National Theater, the Supreme Court, the Bank Indonesia branches, the Ministry of Finance. Yeah. And this is Silaban's residence, also in Bogor. Next is the Occupying Modernism exhibition, the collaboration between arsitekturindonesia.org and Moritz and Sally here. This is commissioned by SBCA Berlin in a bigger title, Encounters with Southeast Asian Modernism. Occupying modernism is a reflection of how Indonesian rendered the spaces of modern architecture. It is a package of events consisting of an exhibition, a talk, and a tour. The exhibition is the heart of the event, which is preceded with a research involving 4 artists/contributors, observing, analyzing, contemplating, noting down their impression about 8 selected modern architecture and the spaces. Each artist explored at least 4 sites, composed of 2 public spaces and 2 domestic environments. The artists were asked to visit, to comprehend, and to establish a certain standpoint, or to develop an idea which will potentially enrich our understanding of the modern spaces. This exhibition focused on representing how we, through the creative and imaginative impression by the artist, occupied, celebrated, used, loved, cared for, disturbed, damaged, left behind, hated, ignored, and rediscovered our modern spaces. The 2 words, modernism and occupying, are our basic theme and strategy for curating this exhibition. Modernism, we frame modern architecture as an imposition, something which dictates, dominates, narrates, not only public spaces, but also domestic environment. Modernist spaces are composed aesthetically, rule out visual noises, demanding the environment well thought, designed, and maintained. State-commissioned architectural projects during the 1960s produced fundamental structures, especially in capital Jakarta, to free it from its colonial background, imposing new nationalist values such as modernism, internationalism, and national unity. While occupying, we select Kopi Manyar Cafe for the venue due to its popularity among the design communities and trendy young people, as owned and run by Indonesia's today most renowned architect, Andra Matin, whose house we showed just now. The renovated old building features sleek, clean, modernist, intimate spaces, which seems dictating the way we occupy the space, from the tendency to fashion monochromatic outfits to the implied hushed conversation. Functioning also as a gallery space, it has been featuring architecture, photography, art exhibitions with the same aesthetic breadth. We use its image to occupy the space with a casual, relaxed, nonchalant, and almost ignorant attitude by the general Indonesian public. In that way, we demonstrate that there are apparent prevailing gap between design modernist spaces and the relaxed everyday life. You can see on the left side is a common review that tells how good Kopi Manyar is as a background for your Instagram pictures, with a few complaints about some dangerous spots where you are prone to bump your head several times. Only a few sentences about the coffee. And on the right side is examples of our installation and how we quote-unquote vandalize the space. Here on the top side, you can see the everyday modern minimalist sleek Kopi Manyar situation, while the bottom are the situation during the exhibition. The exhibition features a rich description of well-known public buildings constructed in 1960s through 1970s and modernist domestic space designed by architects. The projects are Istiqlal Mosque, National Monuments, Pola Building, Gelora Bung Karno Sports Centers, or GBK Super Complex, Hotel Indonesia Roundabout, Silabans Residence, Adi Mursid Residence, and Studio Cahaya. They are presented by original drawings, photographs, new clips, and archival materials depicting historical events associated with sites and spaces. The displays are color-coded. The green ones are the description for the original archives, while the yellow ones are the response from the artists or collaborators. Here are the situation of the exhibitions. As you can see in the pictures, Hikmat Darmawan, one of the artists, responded the object he visited, Istiqlal Mosque and the Pola building, with comics. And here you can also see that Alvin Chitrawiryo used photography as a medium of expression to show his response to the national monument. Meanwhile, Gunawan Muhammad provided sketches and poetry to represent modern architecture of the same object. The unique part of the exhibition is done by Cecil Mariani, who used origami and quotes about gender inequality as a protest against repressive modernism in response to the Istiqlal Mosque and the GBK Sports Center. For this last object, she placed two buns or pau, of which in her memory were always associated with that place. At the end of the exhibition, the buns were already eaten by the ants. Here are the more close-up look at the bun. In addition to the exhibition, we held a series of activities such as discussion and presentations on the history of popular culture and art in Indonesia with Grace Sambo, Setiadi Sopandi, and Hikmat Darmawan, a workshop guided by curator Grace Sambo on the diorama in the National Museum by artist Edi Sunarso, a guided tour to a historic monument by Grace Sambo, a discussion and criticism on elitism in architecture and product design with Setiadi Sopandi, Avianti Armand, and Alvin Chitrawiryo, a visit to a series of modern architectural sites guided by Setiadi Sopandi, and a design workshop by Unconditional Design Community, a film screening of 1950s popular movie depicting Jakarta modern urban development, and a card playing tournament guided by our designers of the installation, Far and Gema Semesta. This is the last project I do with Setiadi Sopandi, Apa Itu AMI, the 30 Years of Indonesian Young Architects exhibition in Kopi Manyar, Jakarta. Apa Itu AMI is a retrospective exhibition on a group of young architects formed in 1989, telling their early activities and how they become influential to younger generation of architects in Indonesia. They started out as a frequent after-hours gathering to share and discuss about their own works and issues surrounding what's new in architecture. The group eventually grew, attracting more people and gathered efforts to launch exhibitions and put themselves in the limelight of printed publication. The year 2020 marks 3 decades from the first they appear in an exhibition as a group of young, unknown, inexperienced architects ended up as the most important figures in the architectural scene in Indonesia today. The exhibition tracks the group's footprints through written archives, photographs, and film slides, facsimiles, and memories. Apa Itu AMI literally means what is AMI? AMI is the abbreviation of Arsitek Muda Indonesia or Young Indonesian Architects. This exhibition displays archives from the activities of these young Indonesian architects during the first 10 years, from minutes meeting, presentation of seminars, manifestos, invitations and exhibition catalogs, photos, slides, books, open house invitation in the form of facsimiles, and prize publication in prize media. What is interesting about this exhibition is the response from a much younger generation to this group that we collect through online survey. Many see the term Indonesian Young Architects as a generic term, and many more of whom are more familiar with the well-known figures than the groups. This is samples of the discussion or open house invitations, facsimile. The exhibition is still ongoing until February 7 and will be continued in the form of virtual exhibition. And this wrapped up the presentation from us. Thank you very much for your patience to listen to our long talk. I give back to Charlotte. Stop sharing.
Thank you very much to both of you. Thank you very much for introducing us to this architecture, which is probably not known to most of us listening. I would like to move into the question round now, if that's okay for everybody. Eva and Bruno, would you like to start? You prepared some questions, right?
Yes, thank you very much for the very interesting presentation, and I would start with the first question. So how can traditional Indonesian architecture and modern architecture learn or benefit from another? And what challenges do you see when combining the two?
We should answer it directly, okay? The question addressed for like, almost like 100 years of search of what we call Indonesian architectural identity. It has been started from the 20s even by Dutch architects. They talk about it, they discuss about it, they design a lot of things about it. The well-known names is, the first one is the McLean Pond. You can search it online, and you can find a lot of patents under his name about architectural structures under his name. He has been experimenting with lots of vernacular forms and combined with modern structural elements and materials. And that effort alone has been inspiring a lot of architects in Indonesia until recently, but not as much as a structural exploration, but more into like how the ambience of the vernacular houses to be incorporated in modern design. That has been always inside or inertly inside the practice of every Indonesian. It's almost like an obsession, I might say. Avianti, probably you want to add something about it.
No, I think you covered all.
I have a question specifically for you, Avianti. Since you're working in the field of literature and in poetic works as well, how does your poetic work influence your architecture, and what parallels do you see between those two arts?
This is the most asked question for me. how do I kind of connect this to discipline? Well, I see that both architecture and literature have almost the same structure. They both have this regulation, like the structure, but both give us enough space, enough room for individual expressions. In architecture, we have this mechanical, electrical, and in literature we have this grammar that we cannot just put aside. But both can be effectively used as our ventilation, for us to channel our emotions. But the difference between architecture and the literature is that I found more freedom in literature because as we know, architecture is a client-oriented profession. So we are dictated by many things, while in literature, I really can find my voice. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's extremely interesting. And maybe like a bit broader, and you have already touched a bit on it when talking about traditional structural systems and materials. But what advice would you have for young architecture students concerning the general issue of climate change?
Is it a question for both of us, or?
Yeah, please feel free.
Okay, I'll start later, then Setiadi can answer. I think we have to stop talking about styles or many things concerning looks. I think we really have to start thinking about materials and the way we construct, the way we do the constructions. We since 2013, I think we have suggested the Indonesian architects through the exhibition of material consciousness that material will have a big role in the to tackle the problem, the very big problem that we have right now is the climate change. If we can find the alternative material, the more sustainable material, and the more sustainable building construction system, then it will kind of save us from being the culprit of the climate change. Because, as you know, construction contribute so many ways that can make that can give the bad effect to the bad impact to the climate change. So yeah, I think we have to start seriously thinking about the material alternatives, which is more environment friendly, and find a new way of more sustainable construction system. Joe, you would like to add?
Yeah, I might add something about the present occupation of architects to retrofit more and to build new less and to destruct less. And but it's suddenly coming as a challenge for Indonesia, because under current regime, under current president, Indonesia is trying so hard to get into to raise its pace in economic development. We have been building so much for the past few years, and probably more in the coming years. Not probably thanks to the pandemic that we kind of slowed down a bit, but actually, as you can see, Indonesian stock market is actually still rising amidst of the failing bodies because of the pandemic. We reached 1 million casualties just a few hours ago. And it's kind of ironic because Indonesia is still kind of grappling of economic development at the moment, where we all have been thinking about so much damage that we cause to our environment on our planet. And this is a challenge also for Indonesian architects at the moment. I've been talking, and also actually I wrote a piece for the next edition of the Art Plus magazine about the preoccupation of Indonesian architects to the world identity. It seems that it has been distract Indonesian architects for searching for real true value for their own work to the society, and instead they're still trying to grab something that is for me is too abstract to be beneficial for the environment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to extend the welcome for questions again via YouTube comment function. If anybody out there would like to ask some questions. I think in the meantime, Helene, you have a question, right?
I was wondering, the contemporary projects that you've shown use a considerable amount of concrete, and then how far do you expect that development to decline in favor of the focus on vernacular building techniques in the coming years, in Indonesia particularly?
Chung, I think you have to answer first.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, that was the challenge because concrete is of course is always a sexy material for architects for so many decades, and we are a victim to that in Indonesia as well. And concrete has been quite material being promoted by even by the colonial government in Indonesia since the first decade even. And our concrete technology is keeping up so fast that even in the 1906, we have been using reinforced concrete as in terms of a Henning system. After a few years being perfected in Europe. So we have been dealing with concrete since the beginning and still being preoccupied by it until this moment. Not, until recently, there are some architects have been experimenting with or researching about the vernacular structural wonders, but sadly, we are lacking of the actual material being used in the first place, as we shown in the Venice Biennale exhibition. We hardly get to have hardwood pieces from ironwood from Kalimantan because of the deforestation, and thick wood commerce is now almost illegal, except you have been keeping the wood for generations or recycle it from the previous construction. We have really no chance of using the same materials as before. And the challenge is to how to use the available material or recycle it in a good way, so we can really have a good investment of dealing with the materials in the first place. And there's not so many research have been out as a technique or as something that we can realize in practice. But recently, there's a search of young architects doing a lot of experiment with bamboo, and it's quite promising.
I'll add a bit. If the architects still do the business as usual, I think it's we won't see any promise of better environment in the future. And actually, it needs more discourse that discussing the use of many other sustainable materials compared to concrete, because concrete is the easiest and very easy and have a long life, long lasting life compared to other materials. So it needs more than just the experiment to find a new way of construct the construction system and a new material, alternative material, but it also needs the contribution of many other parties to promote the more sustainable material in the future. I think then that's how we can have a better built environment.
I'd have a straight follow-up to that. My second question is actually concerning the point of kind of architectural education, because obviously you need a certain knowledge to obviously use vernacular technique. So my question was, how well known are Indonesian vernacular traditional techniques within the Indonesian building seen or cultured today anymore? Because I know that there are some countries that are kind of losing certain techniques because the knowledge isn't spread as wide in the culture or in the society anymore. So I was wondering what the situation was in Indonesia about that.
Well, I'm not following the education situation right here in Indonesia, but there are private initiatives that promoting and rebuild and conserve the traditional way of building, such as the rumah asuh that we mentioned before, and we have the archives in our website. But aside from that, I don't know whether the education system has already adopted the vernacular building system or the traditional building system. Maybe Chung can add to that.
Yeah, generally the education system is still tangled up with the bureaucratic, as always, bureaucratic imposition of the so-called curriculum. But we are actually at the pivotal moment when the board of architects has been established and trying to grab a hold in education professional system, so it can be a very good benchmark for architectural graduates and practices in Indonesia, including the education system itself that should be directed towards that, instead of following the imposition of rules and regulation guidelines by the generic education system in Indonesia. There are so many schools in so many different areas and remote islands even, and there's some hope that even what I heard several months ago, that there's a program like in Bali. One of the school is actually now engaging more and more traditional practice into their curriculum. While once in big cities like Jakarta doesn't have that luxury to do that, because we have no resources, we don't have the experts to teach us that. But there are always some kind of programs and exchange, like Rumah Asuh, of course, it was open for architecture students with some selection process to be enrolled in the program as an apprentice to document and also help the process of the local communities to build their own vernacular houses. And the bureaucracy also itself helps to provide programs with fundings, especially from the education and ministry, education and culture ministry. They have been rebuilding houses, like millions of them all over the region. It's quite lengthy and also a resourceful project involving young architects to deal with that. And one of the key message for these architects are actually, they're supposed not to impose their thoughts they learn in schools. Instead, they have to learn and document first whatever the remaining practice from traditional communities building in their building their own architecture and cultures. And yeah, it still needs some kind of push from either from the authority or also from us, the practicing architects, to recognize more and more about that, aside from and put aside our modern knowledge of architecture and practices a bit aside from the projects.
Thank you very much. I would like to pass the word to Markus Bader and Moritz Henning. Maybe there are some more questions on your side or anything you would like to add.
Yes, thank you. Moritz, if I may go first, just briefly. Thank you very much, Avianti and Setiadi, for your inputs and taking us mentally into an architecture discourse from Indonesia. And also thank you to our student questions that was then through questions very much connected to global concerns of architecture. I was very interested to hear you use the term architecture culture, and also follow your thoughts of exhibiting that is understood as a practice between researching about architecture, translating, and finding ways of representing. Because for me, it was again a sort of reassurance that even though in architecture we very much depend on the spatial experience in one-to-one, we are definitely bound to finding qualitative modes of representing in order to engage in a sort of quality discussion on what we can do with architecture and where we can take it together. I'm not so sure if I really have a question, but let me share a curiosity. And I think, it was interesting to see, let's say, an input from a tropical climate, while we are probably all having our windows closed because it's quite cold outside, minus 0 degrees centigrade. So while buildings over here are very much looked at sort of containers of life that need to keep heat in and cold out, you told us about architectures that have the opposite challenge, or and I'm wondering to what extent an architecture before climate machines, air conditionings, could be a way, or how architecture could contribute, could invite us as humans to kind of use less of this very comfortable climate control situation that also on a daily basis, the same way as our heating contributes to emissions in architecture. I'm saying this because in your response, you were very much focusing on the question of materiality and the agency of materiality in climate change issues. But of course, over the time that a building is used and reused, the question of what kind of energy input is needed to make the spaces usable remains an interesting question. And that's a much wider question than the production of the architectural object. It's sort of the spatial practice that society and everybody is able to deliver. I thought it was cute and interesting to see this kind of very sleepy bodies of the colonialists suffering in tropical heats, posing this as a sort of very vivid question of how can we live in different climates, maybe with less efficiency or and more closeness to the climate situation. And I thought in the example of Andra Martin, the AM house, maybe there was a hint of this outdoor-indoor situation to be renegotiated. And maybe that's more a comment than a question, saying that this is a curiosity I really have, same for here. If we will be able in the future to shrink to smaller spaces in winter and extend in summer in order to reduce energy consumption, which would be a similar kind of climate response than to live more in an outside use air-conditioned spaces to a smaller capsule. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Can I add something to your? Can I respond directly to your?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, actually, that's the what we found from the exhibition, the 12 houses that the 12 buildings that we exhibit in Frankfurt, in Tropicality Revisited, is the same strategy that you mentioned just now, which is contain the volume which is air conditioned, in as small as possible. And then, thanks to the climate, the rest of the house or the rest of the building can be left open and connected to the outer environment. So that's what the most common strategy I think right now done by the architects as a simple method to reduce the use of energy in Indonesia, because yeah, actually even if it's humid and if it's rain, we still can survive that, especially when the rain is over. It's kind of back to normal. So yeah, I think that's what we found from the exhibition, the projects that we showed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Avianti and Setiadi above all, because especially for this late hour in Indonesia, and thank you for being with us and for telling us all these amazing things. Thank you also to Markus Bader and to Moritz Henning, of course. And we were really happy to have you here. Thank you very much for your input.
Was this the